Good day and welcome back to Scriptures Unlocked. We are now on to Genesis chapter 38. We'll be looking at the story of Judah and Tamar. So this presentation is entitled Judah and Tamar. And we'll see how God used this entire sordid affair and work it to his own purposes. Where at the end of this presentation, we'll see that Judah will become the ancestor of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. So in the previous presentation, we left off where Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers. So the story of Joseph is interrupted to tell us about an incident that happened in the life of Judah. Shortly after, he suggested that they sell their brother Joseph as a slave instead of killing him. The brothers later deceived their father Jacob into thinking that his beloved son Joseph was dead. In this chapter, Judah himself will be deceived by his own daughter-in-law to reveal his unrighteousness. So as we have been studying so far, the book of Genesis, from the calling of Abraham in Genesis chapter 12 to the death of Joseph in Genesis 50, is primarily concerned with charting the course of the early patriarchs. And when I speak of the early patriarchs, I'm referring to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and showing the origin and emergence of the children of Israel into a nation. However, when we get to the life of Jacob, 3 stories involving 4 of Jacob's sons were inserted, which gives us an insight into why Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah were not worthy to receive the patriarchal blessing and the birthright. So as we've studied so far, in Genesis 34, we saw where Simeon and Levi, as their father would later describe them, became instruments of cruelty, and they massacred the men of Shechem. They killed an entire city. Reuben had sex with his father's concubine, Bilhah, in Genesis chapter 35. And we are now on to Genesis chapter 38. We'll be looking at Judah breaking away from his family's tradition and making an unwise decision, like Esau, his uncle, to marry a Canaanite woman, a lineage that was cursed by Noah in Genesis chapter 9. However, what we'll notice as well is that Judah, even though he was the one who instigated selling Joseph into slavery, would redeem himself in Genesis chapter 44. And it was his self-sacrificing love at that time why I believe he was chosen as the lineage of all of Jacob's sons, through whom God would bring his son, the Messiah, Jesus Christ, into the world. And notice what we read in 1 Chronicles 5 verse 2. For Judah prevailed above his brethren, and of him came the chief ruler, meaning the kings would descend from Judah's lineage. So even though Judah would have the kingly line, scriptures tell us that the birthright was Joseph's. So when we get to Genesis chapter 43 into 44, we will read about an incident where Joseph, who was now the governor of all Egypt, would play a final prank on his brothers before revealing himself to them. And he said to them that one of their brothers had to stay back while they go back to the land of Canaan and bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, back to prove that they were not spies. So Simeon was chosen to stay behind in Egypt while the other 10 brothers went to Canaan to fetch Benjamin. And when they got back to Canaan, Jacob was reluctant to allow Benjamin to go with them. And Judah made an intervention. And Judah stood as surety for his brother Benjamin. And he told him that if anything happened to Benjamin, he told Jacob that if anything happened to Benjamin, he would stand the blame forever. So when they got back to Egypt with Benjamin, Joseph placed his silver cup in Benjamin's sack as they were on their way back to the land of Canaan. And then Joseph gave instructions to overtake them and to pull a prank on them. And what transpired is that Joseph's cup was placed in Benjamin's sack. And Joseph then said, whoever has stolen my cup, that person would be my slave or my servant forever. And it was at this point in time that Judah stepped forward and told Joseph, not knowing that it was Joseph, his brother, that he pled with his father to allow Benjamin to come. And if Benjamin is not sent back with them, then their father would die because he is the only son of his favorite wife. So Judah showed self-sacrificing love, and he told Joseph that allow the young man to go back to his father. I will take his place as your servant forever. And it was at this point in time that I believe that Judah redeemed himself. And it was through his self-sacrificing love that I believe God decided to choose Judah as a line through whom the Messiah, who himself would take our place. He would take the sins of the entire world upon himself and take our place so that we could have life and have it more abundantly. So that is what would transpire, and we'll read about that when we get there in Genesis chapter 43 and 44. So this presentation, as we'll continue, would talk about what happened between Judah and Tamar. So notice what we read in Genesis 38, verse 1 and 2. And it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brethren and turned into a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hirah. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. And he took her and went in unto her. So Shua was the father of this Canaanite woman. And Judah saw her and he decided to marry her. So viewers, the phrase at that time does not give a precise time period, but is an indication that the incident being referenced here took place shortly after Genesis chapter 37. It was also the custom of that time for fathers to arrange marriages for their children. But Judah dispensed with such tradition and decided to choose his own wife. Marriages to Canaanite women were discouraged from as far back as Abraham in Genesis chapter 24. And we read about that when Abraham gave specific instructions to his servant to go back to the land of his nativity to choose a wife for his son Isaac. And he went back and he chose Rebekah as Isaac's bride. So from as far back as Genesis 24, marriages to Canaanite women were forbidden, were discouraged by the earliest patriarchs, Abraham. Isaac would also give Jacob the same instructions not to marry any Canaanite woman. And that is why he sent him away to Haran, back to Rebekah's own family. And it was from Haran that he chose Rachel to be his wife, and he worked 7 years for Rachel. So in Genesis 24, verse 2 to 3, we see, and Abram said unto his eldest servant of his house, that ruled over all that he had, put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh, and I will make thee swear by Jehovah, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that thou shalt not take a wife unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell. And you can see the same instructions were given to Jacob by his father Isaac in Genesis 28, verse 1 and 2. And Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said unto him, thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, thy mother's father, and take thee a wife from thence of the daughters of Laban, thy mother's brother. So Abraham and Isaac were very specific and did not want their sons to marry Canaanite women because they knew that Canaan was the offspring produced by incest. And he was cursed by Noah in Genesis 9, verse 25, when he said, and I quote, cursed be Canaan, end of quote. So viewers, the Canaanites would later prove to be morally corrupt and of a reprobate mind, which is precisely the reason why in Leviticus 18, God warned the children of Israel not to follow the incestuous ways of the land of Canaan. Leviticus 18, verse 3 and 6 tells us this. God is speaking to the children of Israel, and he said this to them. After the doings of the land of Egypt, wherein ye dwelt, this is after they came out of Egyptian bondage, shall ye not do. And after the doings of the land of Canaan, whither I bring you, shall ye not do, neither shall ye walk in their ordinances. And notice what he goes on to say, which tells us what the Canaanites were like. None of you shall approach to any that is near of kin to him to uncover their nakedness. I am Jehovah. And the phrase uncover nakedness means to have sexual intercourse. So God essentially was saying here that none of you shall have sexual relations with anyone that is related to you or near of kin to you. And that is what was happening in the land of Canaan. So the rest of Leviticus 18 outlines all the incestuous and abominable acts committed by the Canaanites. Therefore, viewers, the Canaanites were cursed and their bloodline tainted. So Judah made an unwise decision to marry a Canaanite woman. And not only did he marry a Canaanite woman, but Judah fathered 3 sons with his Canaanite wife. Notice what we are told in Genesis 38, verse 3 to 5. So after Judah saw this Canaanite woman and went in unto her, she conceived and bare a son, and he called his name which means awake. And she conceived again and bare a son, and she called his name Onan, which means strong. And she yet again conceived and bare a son, and called his name Shelah. And he was at Keziv when she bare him. And Shelah means petition, and Keziv means falls. So Judah had 3 sons with his Canaanite wife. Genesis 38 verse 6 tells us this. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. And Tamar is the Hebrew word for palm tree. Notice, viewers, that Judah sought a wife for his son but he denied his father Jacob the opportunity to choose a wife for him, which again proves that this was a prevailing custom of that time where fathers arranged marriages for their children. Notice what we are then told about and his other sons. And Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of Jehovah, and Jehovah slew him. And Judah said unto Onan, Go in unto thy brother's wife, and marry her, and raise up seed to thy brother. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his. And it came to pass, when he went in unto his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest that he should give seed to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased Jehovah, wherefore he slew him also. Viewers, Genesis 38 verse 8 to 10 is the origin and the first instance of this custom that was later known as Levirate marriage, where if a man's brother died before having a son, then it was the duty of the brother that followed him to take his widow to be his wife and produce an heir in his dead brother's name. This custom was being practiced long before it was codified by God in Deuteronomy chapter 25. Notice what God says. If brethren dwell together, and one of them die, and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her, and take her to him to wife, and perform the duty of an husband's brother unto her. And it shall be that the firstborn which he beareth shall succeed in the name of his brother, which is dead, that his name be not put out of Israel. And if the man like not to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate unto the elders, and say, My husband's brother refuseth to raise up unto his brother a name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. And notice what the elders would then do. Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak unto him. And if he stand to it, and say, I like not to take her, then shall his brother's wife come unto him in the presence of the elders, and loose his shoe from off his foot, and spit in his face, and shall answer and say, So shall it be done unto that man that will not build up his brother's house. And his name shall be called in Israel, the house of him that hath his shoe loosed. So viewers, this was another custom practiced in the ancient Near East. And it was being practiced long before, as we just read in Genesis chapter 38, but it was later codified by God in Deuteronomy chapter 25. So this is why I'm saying that the book of Genesis is the book of beginnings. So here we are seeing the beginning or the emergence or the origin of a custom that we later find elsewhere in the Old Testament. Viewers, the purpose of this custom ensured that the deceased man's name was not forgotten, because the first child produced from such a union would legally be considered the son of the deceased. This custom also protected the widow and provided economic security by keeping the dead brother's land and inheritance within the family. Therefore, viewers, when Onan refused to honor this particular custom to raise up a seed in his brother's name, God killed him because his motive was impure. Onan used Tamar for his own sexual gratification with no intention of fulfilling his duty and obligation as a husband's brother to Tamar, because the word Levirate comes from the Latin word levir, which means husband's brother. Viewers, that is what transpired. God eliminated both of Judah's sons, who was wicked, and Onan, who was also wicked. So to correct Judah's mistake of marrying a Canaanite woman, God had to do some damage control to rectify the situation by slaying these two sons who were wicked in their own right, born to his Canaanite wife. Notice what then transpired in Genesis 38, verse 11 onwards. Then said Judah to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow at thy father's house, till Shelah my son be grown. For he said, lest peradventure he die also, as his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. Viewers, it is evident that Judah blamed Tamar for the demise of his two sons, and he promised to give his third son Shelah to her as a husband, but he clearly had no intention of doing so. Based on his own admission, and I quote, lest he die also that Shelah, as his brothers did, end of quote. However, his sons, and Onan's death had nothing to do with Tamar whatsoever, because they were both wicked, and it was God's plan to bring about his own son, Jesus Christ, through the lineage of Judah. So he eliminated the bloodline of the Canaanite woman. That is what God did. So notice what we then read. Genesis 38, verse 12 to 14. And in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. So there it is, confirmation that Shua was the father-in-law of Judah. And in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. And Judah was comforted and went up unto his sheep shearers to Timnath, he and his friend Hirah the Adullamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, behold, thy father-in-law goeth up to Timnath to shear his sheep. And she put her widow's garments off from her, and covered her with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place, which is by the way to Timnath. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him to wife. So viewers, when Tamar realized that Judah was not going to honor his promise to give Shelah, who was now fully grown, to be her husband, she took matters into her own hands and disguised herself as a prostitute. So notice what we then read in Genesis 38, verse 15 onwards. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be an harlot, because she had covered her face. And he turned unto her by the way, and said, go to, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee. A parenthetical statement was inserted, for he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. So he had no idea whatsoever that this woman was Tamar. He thought her to be a prostitute. And she said, what wilt thou give me that thou mayest come in unto me? And he said, I will send thee a kid from the flock. And she said, wilt thou give me a pledge till thou send it? And he said, what pledge shall I give thee? And she said, thy signet and thy bracelets and thy staff that is in thine hand. And he gave it to her, and came in unto her, and she conceived by him. And she arose and went away, and laid by her veil from her, and put on the garments of her widowhood. So she went back to her father's home. So viewers, she received a pledge from Judah. So Tamar negotiated the price for her quote-unquote services, and after seeing that Judah did not honor his word regarding Shelah, Tamar requested a pledge that is, something to keep until Judah delivered the kid. Because as the saying goes, a promise is a comfort to a fool, and she did not trust Judah to keep his word based on past experience. And Judah sent the kid by the hand of his friend, the Adullamite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he found her not. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, "Where is the harlot that was openly by the wayside?" And they said, "There was no harlot in this place." And Judah said, "Let her take it to her, lest we be shamed. Behold, I sent this kid, and thou hast not found her." So viewers, in this instance, Judah honored his word, but he insulated himself by sending the kid with his friend Hirah to retrieve his signet, bracelet, and staff. And his signet was his tribal ring that was attached by a lace or cord to his staff. It was very valuable. But Hirah could not find Tamar, or this prostitute, this quote-unquote prostitute. So Judah decided to let the prostitute keep the pledge without making any further inquiries out of embarrassment. However, what was done in the dark was about to come to light. And this is what we read about in Genesis 38, verse 24 and 25. And it came to pass about 3 months after that it was told Judah, saying, "Tamar, thy daughter-in-law, hath played the harlot, and also, behold, she is with child by whoredom." And Judah said, "Bring her forth, and let her be burnt." When she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, "By the man whose these are, am I with child?" And she said, "Discern, I pray thee, whose are these? The signet, and bracelets, and staff." So viewers, Judah had to come clean because it was clear that he had sex with his daughter-in-law. And Judah acknowledged them and said, "She hath been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not to Shelah, my son." And he knew her again no more, meaning he did not have sexual relations with her after that. So viewers, Judah was quick to pass judgment on Tamar for playing the harlot, but she was vindicated when she revealed that Judah was the father of her unborn child by presenting his signet, bracelet, and staff as evidence of his pledge. And viewers, in patriarchal times, the penalty for a woman playing the harlot in her father's house was to be burnt, as can be seen below. Notice what we are told in Leviticus 21, verse 9. "And the daughter of any priest," and men were the priests of their homes, "if she profaned herself by playing the whore, she profaned her father, she shall be burnt with fire." So that was the penalty if a woman who was supposed to be a virgin up until the time she got married, if she played the harlot while in her father's house, then she would be burned with fire. Viewers, and it came to pass in the time of her travail that, behold, twins were in her womb. This is the second and final time that twins are ever mentioned in the scriptures, with the first being Esau and Jacob. "And it came to pass when she travailed that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, This came out first, because in that time to be the firstborn was a great privilege. So they always ensured that if there is a possibility that there is a twin, we decide which one is the firstborn. And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. And she said, How hast thou broken forth? This breach be upon thee. Therefore his name was called Pharez. And afterward came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zerah. So Pharez, as you can see on screen, the Hebrew text of their name, Pharez means breach, and Zerah means rising. So viewers, God in his providence used this scandalous affair to achieve his divine purposes. The messianic line can be traced from ordinary human beings like Judah and Tamar with their flawed characters. And the birth of Pharez from the lineage of Judah provides us with the first link in the chain that will ultimately lead to the genealogy of Jesus Christ, as can be seen below. Notice what we are told in Ruth 4, verse 18 onwards. Now, these are the generations of Pharez. This is Pharez' genealogy. Pharez begot Hezron, and Hezron begot Ram, and Ram begot Aminadab, and Aminadab begot Nahshon, and Nahshon begot Salmon, and Salmon begot Boaz, and Boaz begot Obed, and Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David. So Pharez, the son of Judah, became the ancestor of David, and David is the ancestor of Jesus Christ. So notice what we are then told in Matthew 1 verse 1 onwards about the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah. This is Jesus' genealogy, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David. So Matthew starts by making it explicit that Jesus Christ is the son of David, which means Jesus Christ is a direct descendant of King David, the son of Abraham, because remember, everything that we are reading about from Genesis chapter 12 is tracing the genealogy of the seed of the woman that was promised in Genesis chapter 3. And after taking a global look at humanity, in Genesis chapter 12, God decided to call one man, Abraham. And through that one man, he would create a nation. Abraham had the promised son, Isaac. Isaac had twins, Esau and Jacob. Jacob was chosen by God to be the lineage through whom his Messiah would descend. Jacob had 12 sons, and of those 12 sons, Judah was chosen. And we are reading about the incident that will lead up to the Messiah. Judah, unknown to him, had sexual relations with his daughter-in-law, Tamar. Twins were produced, and of the two sons that were born, Pharez was chosen by God. And from Pharez's lineage, Jesus Christ would emerge. So Jesus Christ is not only a descendant of David, he's also a descendant of Abraham. And that is what God was doing to bring about his only begotten son, Jesus Christ, the seed of the woman. And he eliminated the bloodline of the Canaanite woman that Judah married, the daughter of Shua. And God brought about a lineage from Tamar, an Israelite. She wasn't a Canaanite, because God was ensuring that the bloodline that would lead to the Messiah would not be tainted. So that is what happened. So we are going to read about Jesus' genealogy in Matthew chapter 1. And you'll see that he came from ordinary human beings with all our frailties, with all our baggage. Even amid scandal, God used this entire sordid affair to bring about his Messiah, Jesus Christ, who was one of us, a human being. That is why Jesus Christ, even though he was the divine Son of God, he's also the Son of Man. He's also fully human. Let's now continue to read about his genealogy in Matthew chapter 1. So Matthew makes it absolutely clear that this is the book of the generation of Jesus Christ. So he's talking about Jesus' genealogy, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And he's now going to trace Jesus' genealogy all the way from the call of one man, Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac, and Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot Judas, who is Judah, and his brethren. And Judas begot Pharez, which we just read about, and Zerah of Tamar, which is what we are reading about in Genesis chapter 38. And Pharez begot Ezrom, and Ezrom begot Aram, and Aram begot Aminadab, and Aminadab begot Nahshon, and Nahshon begot Salmon, and Salmon begot Boaz of Rakav, and Boaz begot Obed of Ruth, and Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David the king, and David the king begot Solomon of her that had been the wife of Uriah, who we know to be Uriah in the Old Testament. So here on screen, you can see 4 women being mentioned here, because this is tracking the genealogy of Jesus Christ. So the first woman to be mentioned is Tamar, who begot Pharez of Judah. Then the next woman that is mentioned is Rechab. Many persons think that this is Rahab the harlot, but it is not. And I have a presentation on my channel that debunks that entire theory. And then we have Ruth, who begot Obed of Boaz. And Ruth as well is not a Moabite, but an Israelite. I also have another presentation on the channel that debunks that theory and proves without a shadow of a doubt that Ruth was an Israelite. And then the final woman to be mentioned in Jesus' genealogy outside of Mary is Bathsheba, even though she's not named here. But it says here that David the king begot Solomon of her, that's Bathsheba, that had been the wife of Uriah. And Solomon begot Rehoboam, and Rehoboam begot Abiah, and Abiah begot Asa. And you can see the rest of Jesus' genealogy on screen. So there's no break in the chain. And notice now as we get closer to Jesus' genealogy, and Eliud begot Eleazar, and Eleazar begot Matan, and Matan begot Jacob, and Jacob begot Joseph, the husband of Mary. And I'll explain what is happening here. Of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. And Christ means the anointed or the Messiah. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations, and from David until the carrying away into Babylon are 14 generations. And from the carrying away into Babylon unto Christ are 14 generations. So viewers, Matthew 1 verse 16 is crucial for us to understand, because this is a mistranslation of the Hebrew, even though Matthew and the New Testament was written in Greek. So notice what I've discovered. Almost every known translation of Matthew 1 verse 16 records Joseph as, and I quote, the husband of Mary. But think about this, viewers. If that's the case, then this would not be a genealogy of Jesus, because Joseph was not, and I repeat, Joseph was not Jesus' biological father. Jesus' father is God Almighty. Joseph was Jesus' adoptive father. So as I've said, almost every known translation of Matthew 1 verse 16 records Joseph as the husband of Mary. But this Joseph here is not the husband of Mary. This Joseph mentioned in Matthew 1 verse 16 is actually the father of Mary. So there are two Hebrew manuscripts which shows that the Joseph mentioned in Matthew 1 verse 16 was actually the father of Mary and not the husband of Mary. Here are the two manuscripts. Here you can see in Hebrew, this is Yosef, Avi, Miriam. It is Yosef, Avi, Miriam, which means Joseph, father of Mary. So this is a manuscript that is found at the Oxford Library. And you can see in Hebrew, because the book of Matthew was originally written in Hebrew, it was then translated into Greek and other languages. From the Hebrew manuscript, this is the first copy. It shows that Matthew 1 verse 16 shows that what is actually written there is Yosef, Avi, Miriam, which translates to Joseph, father of Mary, and not Joseph, husband of Mary. Here is the other manuscript, and you are seeing a photocopy of this Hebrew manuscript. And this manuscript is found at the New York Jewish Theological Seminary. And again, highlighted, you are seeing Yosef, Avi, Miriam, translate to Joseph, father of Mary. And here is the genealogy of Jesus. It starts with God Almighty creating Adam, and from Adam, you have the genealogy all the way down to Abraham. Abraham had Isaac, Isaac had Jacob, Jacob had Judah, Judah begot Perez or Pharez, Perez begot Hezron, Hezron begot Ram, Ram begot Aminadab, Aminadab begot Nahshon, Nahshon begot Salmon, Salmon begot Boaz, Boaz begot Obed, Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David. And from David, we have two of David's sons, Solomon, through whom the kingly line continued. Solomon had Rehoboam, and you can see all Solomon's descendants all the way down to Jacob. And Jacob begot Joseph, and this Joseph is the father of Mary. So this Joseph in Matthew chapter 1 verse 16 is actually the grandfather of Jesus. And it proves that Jesus is descended from the line of Judah. So this Joseph mentioned in Matthew 1 verse 16 is not the husband of Mary, because as Matthew 1 verse 1 states categorically, this is the generations of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. How could Jesus be the son of David if Joseph mentioned here is actually the husband of Mary? There'll be no bloodline. There'll be no link between Joseph and Jesus, because Joseph is not Jesus' biological father. Jesus was conceived by the power of the Holy Spirit. Jesus was born of divine origin. He is the son of God the Father. So this Joseph mentioned in Matthew 1 verse 16 is actually the father of Mary, which proves that Mary is also descended from David. So Mary is also from the tribe of Judah. And that is how Jesus is linked to David through his biological mother, Mary. And then you have another son of David, Nathan. And this on the right gives us Luke's genealogy. So this is actually, this Joseph mentioned in Luke chapter 3 is actually the husband of Mary, the adoptive father of Jesus. So legally, Joseph adopted Jesus as his son, but biologically, Jesus is linked to David through Mary and her father, who is a descendant of King David through the line of Solomon. And here you can see from Abraham all the way to David, we have 14 generations. You can count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 generations from Abraham to David. There's also 14 generations from David until the captivity in Babylon. And 14 generations from Shealtiel to Jesus Christ. And if you count it, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Jesus is the 14th generation from Shealtiel, from the captivity in Babylon until the birth of Christ. So the scripture is absolutely clear that Jesus Christ is descended from David. And that is what Matthew 1 verse 1 states. And the only way that is possible is if the Joseph mentioned in Matthew 1 verse 16 is actually the father of Mary, who is the biological mother of Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ was not born of the flesh. He was born of the Spirit. He was conceived by the power of the Holy Spirit. Joseph did not impregnate Mary, because as we will read it, as if you read further in Matthew 1, it tells us that Mary was espoused to a man called Joseph. Before they came together, Jesus was born. So Mary was a virgin. Jesus gets his humanity from his mother, his biological mother, Mary, who is a descendant of David, who is a descendant of Abraham. So that is how Jesus gets his humanity from his biological mother. So viewers, that is absolutely clear, and that is important for us to understand. Because if Joseph mentioned in Matthew 1 verse 16 is actually the husband of Mary, then this could not have been a genealogy of Jesus Christ. the son of David, the son of Abraham, because there's no link between Joseph and Jesus, since Joseph was not Jesus' biological father. I hope that is clear. So viewers, as we close, so what I've just mentioned makes perfect sense, because the book of Matthew was written to the Jews to prove that Jesus is the Messiah and a direct descendant of David, as we just read in Matthew 1 verse 1. The Gospel of Matthew was originally written in Hebrew before being translated into Greek. So Matthew's genealogical account shows Jesus Christ is a descendant of King David from the tribe of Judah through his son Solomon and his biological mother Mary, who married a man by the name of Joseph, Jesus' adoptive father, who also shared the same name as her father. As it says in the Hebrew manuscripts, Yosef, Abi, Miriam, Joseph, father of Mary. And this again also confirms the 14 generations from the carrying away into Babylon to Jesus Christ in Matthew 1 verse 17. Viewers, that brings us to the end of Genesis chapter 38, where I showed you that God used this incident between Judah and Tamar to bring about his only begotten son, Jesus Christ, who was a direct descendant of David through the kingly line, Solomon. And this is why Jesus Christ can make a legitimate claim to be the king of Israel, as was said by Nathanael when Jesus saw him and told him that, I knew you from you were under the fig tree. And he said, thou art the Christ, the King of Israel. So Jesus Christ can make a legitimate claim to be the King of Israel because he descended from the kingly line of David through Solomon. So thanks for listening, viewers. Thanks for watching. And may God continue to bless us as we continue to study his words to prove all things. The next presentation, we will take up the story of Joseph, now a slave in Egypt. Have yourselves a great day.